I had a job interview the morning my son-in-law told me I was costing them too much to keep around. Not that he used those words exactly. He never did. That was the thing about my son-in-law. He had a way of saying cruel things in the voice of a man just trying to have a reasonable conversation. I had found the job listing myself on the library computer 3 weeks earlier. A small dental office on the east side of town needed a part-time receptionist, Tuesday through Thursday, 20 hours a week. The pay wasn't much, but I wasn't looking for much. I was 64 years old and I had been living in my daughter's spare bedroom for 11 months, and what I needed more than money was something that belonged to me. A reason to put on real shoes. A place where someone knew my name and was glad I'd shown up. I didn't tell my daughter I'd applied. I didn't tell her when they called me back. I didn't tell her when I ironed my blue blouse the night before and set my good flats by the door. Some things you keep to yourself, not out of secrecy, but out of self-preservation. I had learned that distinction the hard way, somewhere between month 3 and month 4 of living under her roof. My daughter's name is Annalise. She was 38 that year, the kind of beautiful that made strangers look twice, and the kind of capable that made everyone around her feel slightly insufficient. I had raised her mostly alone, after her father left, working double shifts at the hospital laundry for 11 years, putting her through college on a combination of grants and careful spending, and the kind of stubbornness that doesn't have a more flattering name. I loved her the way you love someone you've bled for. Completely. Without reservation. I moved in with her after my lease ended in April. I had been renting a small apartment in Roanoke for 6 years, but the build sold and the new owners raised the rent by $400, and I was on a fixed income that did not have $400 of give in it. Annalise called me the same week I got the notice. She said, "Come stay with us, Mom. We have the room. It makes no sense for you to struggle when we have space. We." That included her husband. His name was Preston, and he was the kind of man who shook your hand too firmly and laughed too loudly, and always seemed to be performing for an audience that wasn't there. He worked in commercial real estate, drove a car that cost more than I had earned in 3 years of laundry shifts, and had opinions about everything from interest rates to the proper way to load a dishwasher. He tolerated me the way you tolerate a piece of furniture that someone insists on keeping even though it doesn't match the rest of the room. The first few months were fine, or what passes for fine, when you are a grown woman sleeping in a room that used to be an exercise space and still smells faintly of rubber mats. Annalise and I had coffee in the mornings before she left for work. We watched old movies on Friday nights. She brought me back hand cream from the pharmacy, without being asked because she remembered I liked the lavender kind. Those small things kept me from feeling like a burden, or they tried to. Preston started in around month 4. Not dramatically. That's never how it starts. It started with comments about the thermostat. I liked the house at 68 degrees. He liked it at 72. One evening I came downstairs and he said, very pleasantly, that running the heat that high was adding to the utility bill and he'd appreciate it if I kept the thermostat at 72 when he wasn't home. I said, of course. I went back to my room and I put on a cardigan and 2 pairs of socks and I read my book and I did not touch the thermostat again. Then it was the groceries. He started leaving a notepad on the counter where I was supposed to write down anything I'd used from the kitchen so they could split the cost. I understood this on a practical level. I also understood what it meant on every other level. I started keeping a small stash of food in my room. Crackers, peanut butter, a tin of tea bags. Things that didn't require refrigeration and wouldn't show up on any notepad. My daughter saw none of this, or she chose not to. I was never sure which. By month 7, Preston had taken to sighing whenever he came home and found me in the living room. Not a tired sigh. A particular kind of sigh, slow and pointed. The kind that said, I'm being very patient. I started spending more time in my room. I bought a small reading lamp from the thrift store because the overhead light had a harsh quality that hurt my eyes. And I kept the door closed, and I read, and I did my crossword puzzles, and I tried to take up as little space as possible. That's the thing no one tells you about living in someone else's house at 64. You get very good at being small. The situation with my grandson happened in February. His name is Cody, and he is 23. Annalise's son from a brief marriage before Preston that no one talks about anymore. Cody is a good kid in the way that some young men are good, Not because they've worked at it, but because they haven't yet had enough friction to go the other way. He had a steady job at an automotive shop, paid his rent on time, texted me on my birthday without being reminded. I liked Cody. I was glad he existed. He called me on a Wednesday evening. I was in my room with the reading lamp on and a cup of tea going cold on the nightstand. He asked how I was doing. I told him fine, which was mostly true, depending on what you were measuring. Then he told me what he was actually calling about. He needed someone to co-sign a personal loan, $12,000. He wanted to open a small side business, something about custom auto detailing, equipment and supplies, and the first month's deposit on a small garage unit. He'd already talked to the bank. His credit score was good, but not quite good enough to qualify a loan at 23, and they needed someone with an established credit history to sign alongside him. He asked his mother first. He told me. She'd said no. He didn't say why. He asked me next. I didn't answer right away. I asked him to tell me everything. The loan terms, the monthly payment, his plan for the business, what happened to the loan if the business didn't work out. He answered every question. He was prepared in a way that made me think he had practiced. I told him I needed a few days to think about it. After we hung up, I sat in my room for a long time. I knew what co-signing meant. I had co-signed a car loan for a cousin's husband when I was 31 and spent the following 2 years making up missed payments out of my own pocket because he decided the car was more important than the loan. I had never made that mistake again, not because I stopped trusting people, but because I learned the difference between love and liability. The issue wasn't Cody. The issue was the math. $12,000. If Cody hit a rough patch, if the business stumbled before it found its footing, if anything went sideways, that debt would attach to me. I was 64 years old with no savings buffer and a Social Security check that covered my phone bill, my medication, and not much else. I was already dependent on a situation I had no control over. Adding a $12,000 liability to that equation was not something I could do. I called Cody back 2 days later and told him I couldn't do it. I explained my reasoning carefully, the same way I'd reasoned it out for myself. He was disappointed. I could hear it in the pause before he said, "Okay, I understand, Grandma." I told him I was proud of him for trying and that I believed the business would work eventually, one way or another. He said thank you. We talked for another few minutes about nothing in particular, the way you do when you both need time to let something settle. That was on a Friday. On Saturday morning, Annalise came to my door. She knocked, which she did not always do. I told her to come in. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her face arranged in the expression I had seen 100 times over 38 years. The one that meant she had already decided something and was now preparing to tell me what it was. She asked me why I'd said no to Cody. I told her what I'd told him. The risk, the terms, my financial position, my past experience. She listened. Then she said that Cody was her son, that she had raised him and knew his character, and that he wasn't going to let her mother get stuck with a debt he couldn't pay. She said this with complete confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from not having been the one making up someone else's missed car payments at 31. I said I understood she believed that. I said I still had to make the decision that was right for me. There was a silence then. Not a comfortable one. She said very quietly that she and Preston had talked about it, that they had expected me to help Cody since they were helping me, that they thought it was the least I could do. I looked at her standing in my doorway. I had ironed her school uniforms for 13 years. I had worked extra shifts so she could go on the class trip to Washington when she was 15. I had driven 3 hours in the rain to help her move into her first apartment and 3 hours home again with a bad back that took 2 weeks to settle. I looked at her and I thought about all of that, and then I let it pass through me, and I said, "Annalise, I am not going to co-sign the loan. I'm sorry." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said it. She said, "Then we need to talk about what happens next with this living arrangement." She said Preston felt it wasn't fair that I was there indefinitely, that they'd assumed it would be temporary, that they needed a timeline. She said they weren't asking me to leave that day, but they thought I should start making other plans. She said it calmly. That was the part I kept coming back to later. How calm she was. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed for a while. Not crying. I wasn't ready to cry yet. I was doing something quieter than crying. I was taking stock. I had my social security. I had a job interview on Monday morning that I had told no one about. I had a box of things from my old apartment that were still in the corner of this room. Books, my good dishes wrapped in newspaper, a coffee maker that was better than the one in the kitchen downstairs. I had a phone. I had my health, mostly. I had 64 years of knowing how to manage on not quite enough. I sat with those things and I thought, I have more than I realized. The interview on Monday was at 9 in the morning. I wore the blue blouse. I took the bus because I did not want to ask anyone for a ride. The office was small and clean. 3 dental chairs visible through the glass partition. The waiting room done in soft gray and pale wood. The woman who interviewed me was the office manager, in her 50s, practical and warm in the way of women who have seen a lot and still chosen pleasantness. Her name was not important, but her manner was. She made me feel like a candidate, not an afterthought. She asked about my work history. I told her about the hospital laundry, the years of scheduling and coordination, the systems I had learned. I told her about the 2 years I'd spent helping run the office at my church, managing volunteers and communications, and the small chaos of weekly events. She nodded. She made notes. At the end, she asked when I could start. I said 2 weeks, though I did not yet know what those 2 weeks would look like. She said she'd be in touch by Wednesday. I thanked her and took the bus home and let myself back into my daughter's house very quietly, because it was 10:30 in the morning and I did not want to explain where I'd been. The call came Wednesday as promised. I sat in my room and listened to the office manager's voice tell me the position was mine if I still wanted it. I said yes. I said yes without hesitation. I thanked her and hung up and sat there for a moment in the quiet of that room that smelled like rubber mats and other people's decisions, and I let myself feel what I felt, which was something close to air. I didn't tell Annalise that night. I was still working through what came next. What came next was the storage unit and the spreadsheet, and 3 weeks of very careful arithmetic. I had spent 11 months not looking at my finances directly, the way you sometimes don't look directly at something that frightens you. I made myself look now. I sat with my phone and my notepad, and I laid everything out. Social Security income, the job salary part-time, my monthly prescriptions, what a room rental would cost, not an apartment, just a room, something modest, in a shared house or a boarding situation. What the bus route looked like between possible neighborhoods and the dental office on the east side. The numbers were tight. They were always going to be tight. But they were possible. That was the word I kept coming back to. Possible. I found the listing on a Thursday through the bulletin board at the library. A woman named, I will call her my landlady, because what she became was more than a name, was renting a furnished room in her home on a quiet street, 20 minutes from the dental office. She was in her 70s and had rented rooms for years and wanted someone steady and quiet and non-smoking. I called her from the library parking lot. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked if I liked gardens. I told her I loved them. She said, come by Saturday. The room was at the back of the house, facing the yard. It had a window that let in the afternoon light, and a small desk, and a bed with a white quilt, and a nightstand with a real lamp, the soft kind, the kind that doesn't hurt your eyes. There was a shared bathroom, a shared kitchen, and a small porch where you could sit in the evenings. The rent was $480 a month, utilities included. I looked at that room for a long time. I looked at the window and the light and the white quilt, and I thought about the reading lamp I'd bought at the thrift store, and I thought about the thermostat and the notepad on the counter and the sigh my son-in-law did when he came home and found me in the living room. I told my landlady I'd take it. I moved out on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after Annalise had stood in my doorway and told me to start making other plans. I did not make a scene. There was nothing to make a scene about. I packed what was mine, which wasn't much. The box that had been in the corner, the reading lamp, the small tin of tea bags, my clothes, my good dishes, still wrapped in newspaper. I made 2 trips to the car I had borrowed from a woman at my church, a friend of many years, who had not asked many questions and had simply handed me the keys. Annalise helped me carry the last box. She stood at the trunk of the car, and her face was doing something complicated, something I recognized from when she was young and had gotten her way, and wasn't sure how she felt about it. She asked if I needed anything. I said no, I was fine. I said I had found a nice room and a job and that I would be all right. She said, Mom, I didn't mean. I said, I know. And then I said, I love you. Because that was true and nothing that had happened changed it. And I got in the car. I didn't cry on the drive over. I wasn't sure what I felt yet, so I didn't try to name it. The first evening in my room, I unpacked my dishes and set up my reading lamp and made a cup of tea on the little 2-burner stove in the shared kitchen. My landlady was watching something in the living room, some nature program, and she called out that there was milk in the fridge if I wanted it. I said, thank you. I took my tea back to my room and I sat in the chair by the window and I looked out at the garden in the late light. It was a small garden. Daffodils coming up along the fence, bare ground turning soft with the end of winter. A bird feeder shaped like a little red barn, empty but for a few old seeds. Nothing dramatic, nothing you'd put in a magazine. But it was quiet. It was mine to look at for as long as I wanted. I thought about my daughter. I thought about Cody and his business idea and the loan I hadn't signed. I thought about all the years I had managed on not quite enough, and how that experience, which had sometimes felt like failure, was actually the thing that was holding me up right now. You learn things in hard years. You don't realize you've learned them until you need them. I started work the following Tuesday. I was nervous in the way you are nervous when something matters. I wore the blue blouse again, and I took the bus and I walked into that small, clean office and the woman at the front desk. My predecessor, training me out, smiled and handed me a cup of coffee and started showing me the system. By 11 o'clock, I had greeted 6 patients by name and figured out the scheduling software and made the office manager laugh twice. By the end of the day, I was tired, in a way I had not been tired in months. A useful tired, an earned tired. I took the bus home and I unlocked the door to my landlady's house and I took off my shoes in the entryway and she called from the kitchen that there was soup if I wanted any. I said yes, please. I sat at her kitchen table and I ate soup, and she told me about the birds she'd seen in the garden that afternoon, and I told her about my first day, and we talked for a little while. The way 2 people can talk, when there is no performance required, no careful monitoring of how much space you're taking up. Then I went to my room. I changed out of my blue blouse. I sat in the chair by the window with the reading lamp on, and I did not feel like a burden, and I did not feel like a piece of furniture that didn't match. I felt like someone who had made a reasonable set of decisions under difficult circumstances and had come through them intact. That was enough. It was more than enough. Cody called a few months later. He had found a different solution. A credit union that worked with young borrowers, a smaller loan, a slower start than he'd originally planned. He was taking on 3 clients a week out of a borrowed space while he saved for the garage deposit. He sounded good. He sounded like someone building something. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it without reservation. He asked about my room and my job, and I told him both were fine, which was true. He said he was glad. He said, Grandma, I just want you to know that I never thought less of you for saying no. I said, I know, sweetheart. I said, I never thought less of you for asking. We talked for a while about nothing much, the daffodils in my landlady's garden, which had come up beautifully by then, the bird feeder, which I had refilled and which was now doing excellent business with a pair of cardinals who came every morning. Small things, good things. After we hung up, I went to the window and looked out at the garden in the evening light. There is something they don't tell you when you're young and raising children and managing on not quite enough. They don't tell you that the life you're building in those hard years, the steadiness, the resourcefulness, the knowledge of exactly how little you need to be all right. All of that is still yours. Your children can't take it. Your son-in-law's sighs can't diminish it. You can sleep in a spare room that smells like rubber mats for 11 months, and it's still there, waiting for you, all the things you know about yourself. You just have to choose to use them. I read in the quiet. I tended a garden that wasn't technically mine, but that I felt responsible for. I went to work 3 days a week and came home useful and tired. I made my own food on my own schedule and set the thermostat where I liked it, and no one kept a notepad. Your peace is not something you earn when the circumstances are right. It's something you protect. It's something you leave for, if you have to, with 2 boxes and a borrowed car and your good dishes wrapped in newspaper. I left for mine on a Saturday morning. I have not regretted it for a single day.